45 degrees below zero was the thermometer's reading. Captain was inside the wooden fort. In the bottle, William Clark's ink had solidified. He briefly heated it over a candle flame to cause a few scratches. Words before his journal froze once more. Only 30 minutes might the sentries outside stand guard before even the water in their cups hardened to ice overnight, forcing them back inside due to frostbite. Fort Mandan was located in December of 1804. The expedition of Lewis and Clark had constructed its winter quarters in what would become North Dakota, along the banks of the Missouri River. The 18-foot timber walls of the fort provided little defense against the harsh winters in the northern plains. The men gathered around enormous fires that burned quantities of wood. They still shivered, though. 300 yards across the river, something extraordinary was taking place. Families relaxed contentedly around little fireplaces in the Mandan People's Earth Lodge villages. Kids played sans bulky furs. Crafts were done by women in stable environments, close to 70°. In the wooden fort, the same blizzard that was gradually murdering men was merely a far-off sound to the families whose houses were partially buried in the ground. Clark would subsequently write about his visits to these villages in his journal. The warmth astounded him. He observed the tiny fires. It appeared to be quite effective. He saw people in luxury while his own men endured hardships in spite of burning at a startling rate through their wood supplies. During that winter, Clark saw engineering that had been developed over many centuries. Understanding was the key to determining the difference between cold and comfort. Something basic about housing. Anything that would require an additional 150 years of present building science to thoroughly explain using thermodynamics and mathematics. This is the tale of how Native Americans throughout the Great Plains and beyond created architectural solutions that were so successful that they were able to retain comfortable living conditions. Getting through 90-degree summers and 40-degree winters with just the materials at hand and wisdom amassed over many generations. It tells the tale of an engineer who used natural processes instead of rather than opposing them. Additionally, it's a tale of wisdom that was all but forgotten because newcomers only witnessed the surface and were unable to comprehend what was underneath. It wasn't the Earth Lodge that won design. It was a tradition of architecture that spread over hundreds of thousands of miles in many shapes, of years. Along the Missouri River, the Mandan, Hatsa, and Arikara peoples constructed circular formations that are 40-60 feet in diameter. In the Columbia River, further west tribes built pit dwellings on the plateau that were buried even deeper. In the centuries ago, peoples in the Southwest evolved their own variants of the PBLO. However, the essential idea stayed the same despite all of these changes: cooperate with the steady temperature of the earth instead of opposing it. To comprehend why these buildings fared so much better than the timber forts and log homes that newcomers built, we must comprehend their true construction. Because each and every component from the depth of there was a reason for excavating to the depth of the earth covering. The first step of Mandir Earth Lodge was site selection. The site needed to be high above the river, close to high enough to prevent floods in the spring, yet low enough to allow easy access to water. Cottonwood trees, which were abundant in the bottomlands of the Missouri River, were necessary for the location. The structural timbers would come from these enormous trees. In late spring or early summer, construction began when the ground had dried and thawed. First, a circular trench had to be dug out. The excavation was only 12 to 24 inches below the surface, not as deep as a cellar. However, that small depth had a significant impact. At a depth of 2 feet, the earth. In contrast to the air temperature above, the temperature remained fairly constant. In the plains to the north, the ground. At that depth, the temperature remained constant at about 55 degrees F throughout the year. During the winter, when the earth 2 feet below stayed at 55 degrees, while the surface air plummeted to 40 degrees below. The earth 2 feet below remained at 55 degrees during the summer, when the surface air rose to 95 degrees. The initial piece of the engineering jigsaw was this link to the thermal mass of the ground. The excavation made a circle for a standard family lodge that was 30 to 40 feet in diameter. A few ceremonial lodges were 60 feet in diameter. The earth that was dug up was not thrown away. It would eventually be included into the roof covering. It was carefully placed around the edge for the time being. Then came the framework for structure. 4 substantial posts made of cottonwood, each over 10 feet tall with naturally forked tops, and were arranged in a square arrangement buried deep in the ground in the middle. These posts weren't only structural. They stood for the 4 directions and the pillars supporting the sky in Mandan cosmology. However, in actuality, these were the main components that would sustain the weight of the earth-covered structure. Roof. It took the combined strength of several persons to move these center posts into place. Every post was weighed, several hundred pounds, which needed to be raised vertically before being lowered into a hole that had been drilled, 3 to 4 feet deep. Carefully placed holes allowed the posts to create a perfect square, with each one being roughly 10 feet from its neighbor. Heavy beams were installed after the posts were upright, and the holes were tightly packed with stones and dirt, forming a sturdy foundation in the middle between the fork tops. Shorter poles around the excavation's perimeter were buried, forming a 6 to 7 foot tall circular wall. The outside posts had forked tops and were around 8 feet apart. The lower border of the roof would be supported by a circle of outside pillars that delineated the structure's perimeter. The rafters were the next piece. Long poles devoid of bark and branches stretched in a spoke-like fashion from the outer posts to the central beams. These rafters extended over the central beams at one end and rested in the outer post's forks at the other. The angle was meticulously computed based on generations of expertise. Snow would fall if it were too steep, but the soil covering would come off with ease. If it were too shallow, the structure would collapse under the weight of the snow and soil. The outcome rose between 14 and 18 feet in a gentle dome form at the smoke hole at the center. The placement of the rafters was deliberate. They were arranged to form a geometric design that dispersed equally distribute the weight. 20 to 30 rafters protruded from the center of a 40-foot lodge resembling wheel spokes. Rafts were firmly lashed where they joined the center beams, used rawhide strips that would shrink as they dried, resulting in joints that gradually became tighter. In between, smaller poles were arranged horizontally to form a lattice over the main rafters. The covering materials were supported by this lattice, which also assisted in distributing the weight among all the air gaps that would later be included into the insulation system and constructed rafters. The system of coverings moved forward in layers that were meticulously arranged and had distinct functions. Initially, a dense blanket of tiny willow branches was weaved radially across the lattice. These branches of willow, chopped, were weaved and bent to resemble a basket while still being fresh and pliable. When they dried, they would harden, forming a solid foundation that could sustain the weight above. The willow mat was covered with dry prairie. There was a lot of grass. This was no haphazardly scattered grass. It was when the stalks of prairie grass were dry but not brittle, they were harvested at a certain time of year, packed and kept until required. Like shingles, the grass was spread out in overlapping layers, with each layer filling in the spaces between the layer beneath. The main layer of insulation was the grass. Those empty since-trapped air is one of the best insulators. Grass stems produce thousands of tiny air pockets. Although it wouldn't be scientifically understood until the 20th century, the Earth Lodge architects had discovered it by experience and observation. For added insulation, more thatch was placed over the grass. As well as to avoid disturbing the grass layer, the earth then appeared. The dug soil from the hole, along with extra dirt excavated nearby, was dispersed throughout framework. Usually 4 to 6 inches thick, this earth layer was meticulously packed and sculpted to preserve the dome. Profile. Lastly, the dirt layer was covered with patches of prairie sod. The sod consisted of several inches of soil cut into brick-like rectangles and the grass roots. These chunks of sod were laid using the grass side up, with a small overlap. The grass would regrow in a matter of weeks, establishing roots through the bits of sod and stitching them together to create a living roof that grew stronger over time. The overall thickness was significant for this multi-layer envelope. The wall and roof from the interior to the exterior grass. The assembly may be between 18 and 24 inches thick. Typically, a log cabin wall measured 6 to 10 inches thick. Yet the story isn't fully revealed by thickness alone. The system of entrance merited the same level of care as the primary structure. An enlarged entry passageway in earth lodges predicted 6 to create what contemporary engineers would refer to as an airlock, 9 feet away from the main structure. The exterior of the there was only one door in the passage. There was another at the inner end, where the corridor connected to the main living area. There was a little vestibule. Several issues were resolved by this double-door system. In the summer, to get the most airflow, both doors could be left open. The outside door kept out the wind during winter storms and snow, and the living area was shielded by the inner door. Above all, when only one door opened at a time when someone entered or left during the winter. The area in the vestibule kept cold air from hurrying straight into the cozy living room. Another windbreak was frequently constructed within the entrance tunnel. Before entering the main area, the air had to make multiple twists due to this wall or screen. This curving path, so even if cold air managed to pass through the doors, it would need to combine with, before approaching the living area, slow down and breathe in the warmer air. The outcome was that in the harshest blizzards, families could hardly feel the draft. The smoke hole at the top of the building was the only alternative opening. This hole, which was between 3 and 4 feet across, was situated exactly above the main fire pit. Naturally, hot smoke rose through this aperture, and generations of expertise had been used to determine the size. Too little, and the inside would be filled with smoke. Heat would escape too quickly if it were too big. Though when it rains or snows a lot, the entrance could be partially covered. A bullboat, on the windward side, a tiny circular boat constructed from buffalo skin, stretched over a willow frame, might be placed to keep the smoke from escaping, while preventing it from being forced back down into the lodge. The internal structure was just as meticulously designed as the building itself. The fire pit was situated at precisely in the middle, right beneath the smoke hole. It wasn't a random placement. Heat radiates uniformly throughout instructions from a single location. Thus, the entire area was uniformly warmed by a central fire. The actual fire pit was a meticulously designed element, usually measuring 12 to 18 inches in diameter and 18 to 24 inches in deep, with a clay-lined bottom that wouldn't deteriorate even after years of continuous firing. Around the exterior wall, the sleeping places were situated between the support posts. These weren't just floor-level beds, they grew up pole bedsteads that were roughly 2 feet high. It was a clever design. Wooden. To create a rectangular frame, poles were lashed together. The bottom of the frame was covered with additional poles. Next, these bottom poles were covered with new, still-wet buffalo skin. Tightly fastened to the frame was the hide, and let it dry. The buffalo leather shrank as it dried, drawing itself taut and forming a flexible surface that functioned as a platform in suspension. As a result, people were able to sleep comfortably without getting cold. Floor and permitted airflow beneath it. Each bedroom could be enclosed with curtains of seclusion made of dressed buffalo or elk hides, frequently embellished with fringe or quill work. There was more to these drapes than just seclusion. They made easier to reach smaller areas in the bigger room, to stay warm. There was built-in storage in the floor, cache pits with a bell form, 5. Below the floor, a base that was 3 to 5 feet broad and 8 feet deep was dug out. Level. Willow branches and dried grass were used to border these trenches, which were subsequently filled with dried maize, beans, squash, and sunflower seeds. A timber cover or a block of stone could be used to conceal the little gap at floor level. The form was essential. While the broader base allowed for optimal ventilation, the narrow neck kept cold air from descending into the pit. Volume of storage. All year long, the temperature of the earth around the trenches remained constant at about 55 degrees F. This prevented food from rotting in the summer or freezing in the winter. Even the most valuable horses in the family remained corralled close to the entryway during the worst winter weather. This went beyond merely safeguarding priceless animals. The construction was made warmer by the heat from the horse's body, and they remained healthy and prepared to ride when needed by staying indoors. Why was all this engineering important now? Why did the performance of these earth lodges surpass that of the log huts and wooden forts constructed by immigrants? The mechanism of heat transfer and the way materials react to temperature. There are 3 ways that heat can move: conduction via materials, radiation across space, and convection through air movement. A sturdy earth lodge reduced all 3 kinds of simultaneous loss of heat. Let's start with conduction. Warm places release heat through solid materials to chilly regions. The temperature differential and the flow rate determine that today's R value represents the material's resistance to heat flow. Wood has somewhat insulating qualities. A 6-inch timber wall offers some heat resistance. Flow, but by today's standards, not much. Soft wood has an RV value of roughly 1.4 each inch. Thus, the R value of a 6-inch log wall is around 8. The 18 to 24-inch and earth lodge with multiple layers of covering offered far greater resistance. Above all, the several levels with the air gaps between them produced a barrier that was far more effective. The combination of thatch, dry grass, and willow branches. Together, the ground and live sod significantly reduced the rate of heat transfer, more than any one substance could. However, thermal mass was the true benefit. A material's thermal mass is its capacity to absorb, hold, and gradually emit heat. Wood's thermal mass is comparatively low. It rapidly heats up and rapidly cools down. Earth's thermal mass is large. It takes a while for take a long time to cool down after warming up. Heat was absorbed by the enormous volume of earth in the walls and roof of an earth lodge. Both from the fire and during the day, the heat energy was stored in all that earth. Next, the ground gradually returned that stored heat to the living area at night or during cold spells. As a result, temperatures remained steady and did not fluctuate greatly with the weather. A normal diameter of 40 feet, about 150,000 pounds of earth, were housed in an 18-inch deep earth lodge. The walls and roof. That much dirt can store a tremendous amount of heat. Even all that thermal mass would be warmed by a little fire burning for a few hours, and it would then radiate heat for the remainder of during the day and for a large portion of the night. Ground coupling offered still another significant benefit. Beneath the line of frost, which the earth temperature is relatively consistent throughout the year in the northern plains, which are roughly 3 to 5 feet underground, it doesn't become hot in the summer or freeze in the winter. Rather, it remains at about the yearly average air, the local temperature. This indicated that the earth at 5T depth remained between 50 and 55 degrees in the Missouri River Valley, F throughout the year. An earth hut with its walls and floor dug out 2 feet. In essence, it was encased in a temperature-stable habitat and connected to the surrounding soil. During the winter, when the temperature outside fell to 40 degrees, the earth lodge's walls came into contact with at 55 degrees earth. The lodge just needed to increase the temperature by 15 degrees to attain 70 degrees inside. And complete temperature had to be overcome by a surface cabin. Difference. The effect was reversed in the summer, when the earth lodge was encircled by 55-degree earth that acted as the outside air reached 95 degrees, similar to natural cooling, removing heat from the interior. The outcome was that earth lodges need little work to be comfortable during the summer. The largest was probably air infiltration. Most of it was eradicated by earth lodges and a killer for timber constructions. When logs, they shrink when they dry. As it dries over time, a green log may lose 20% of its breadth, the initial 2 or 3 years. This shrinking leaves spaces where logs meet horizontally, at each corner where logs have been chopped or notched, where they join, and around windows and doors. Cold air sinks because it is denser than warm air. In the winter months, frigid air finds warm air exits through the top of a cabin as it floods into every crevice and opening. This influx of air may be the cause of, for a drafty cabin's 30 to 50% overall heat loss. People attempted to resolve this by filling in the holes with grass, mud, and anything else they might find, and re-chinking each autumn. However, the chinking broke and fell out, causing the cracks to open up again. The struggle was never-ending and could never be won in full. There was virtually no air leakage through the roof and walls of earth lodges. The heavy layer of earth physically impeded the flow of air. The entrance, with its double-door airlock system, was the only point of penetration. Hot air had to escape nonetheless, therefore there was a smoke hole at the top. The outcome was a building that might be a lot more airtight than a wooden one. Additionally, the form of an earth lodge helped to its effectiveness. For any given volume, a dome has the smallest surface area. That indicates a smaller area for heat to escape. About 16,000 are enclosed by a 40-foot diameter dome, cubic feet of space with a surface area of roughly 5,000 square feet. Given the same internal capacity, a rectangular structure would have a substantially larger surface area and consequently more loss of heat. Additionally, the dome form naturally discharged snow and actually gathered snow. Free insulation that was installed during the coldest months. These elements all cooperate. Thermal mass, ground coupling, many layers of substantial insulation, low air infiltration, and effective wooden buildings just could not compete with the performance that shape produced. The story is best conveyed by the numbers. By way of direct comparison, the winter of 1804-1805 saw that this distinction was personally experienced by the Lewis and Clark expedition. Mandan Fort was constructed with logs of cottonwood that were cut from the riverbanks. They had 18-foot walls, elevated. The men's apartments in the triangular fort were made of wood. It took roughly 3 weeks to construct. They had constructed sturdy winter quarters, the captains believed. Then the chill struck. Clark noted that the temperature at morning on December 17, 1804, was 45 degrees below zero. It was an extremely cold morning, he noted in his journal. He froze his ink. Centuries. In order to avoid frostbite, they needed to be relieved every half an hour. Overnight, everything that was liquid inside the fort froze solid. Huddled in their quarters, the soldiers were burning up their supply of wood at a startling rate. The hunters on the expedition devoted a great deal of energy to chopping and transporting wood in order to maintain the fires. The ongoing requirement for firewood was draining. To cut trees, carry them back, and split them into firewood, men ventured out in hazardous coal. Massive amounts of wood were consumed as the fires burned non-stop. However, the temperatures inside seldom remained bearable. When the captains went to the neighboring Earth Lodge communities, however, they discovered an entirely different circumstance. Comfortable families, kids playing inside without bulky furs, and mothers cooking and crafting getting ready. Compared to the raging fires at Fort Mandan, the center fire seemed little, almost humble. However, the room stayed cozy and warm. The participants in the voyage were astounded by how the Plains peoples had adjusted to the weather.